Hi, welcome to our next lesson. We're going to be talking about the invasion of Normandy today. Now, if you notice under it, it says Operation Overlord. Operation Overlord, as you could say, is like the planning process for this invasion. If you do not know where Normandy is, it's in northern France, and I'll be showing you some maps in a little bit here. This is one of the bigger things to happen in just all of human history, not just World War II history, but all of human history. This is up to this point, the largest amphibious assault in human history. Though I think a year later, I believe the amphibious assault against the Japanese stronghold and fortified island of Okinawa is larger. I could be wrong there. Maybe for Americans it was larger. I don't know. This is a combined attack, by the way. This is all the Allies. It involved the Americans, the British, Canadians, Canadians, Polish, Free French, and just others. All the Allies are involved in the invasion of Normandy. So it was a big undertaking, is basically what we're talking about, and it is pretty huge. Now the need here was the Allies were hoping to open up a second front. I shouldn't say a second front, a third front. The Soviets had the Germans hard pressed in the east and were pushing them back, but could use help essentially. The British and Americans actually were pushing up in Italy, but we'd been pretty much held pretty good at. It was harder for us to push up that peninsula, being narrow. We were pushing through, but if we could get one more front against the Germans, then it was pretty much a done deal. They were going to go down, and this is it. So there was a lot of planning that went into this. So to kind of start things off, in planning the largest invasion of all history, well, you had to have a bit of a trial run first, I guess you could say. So actually in 1943, the Allies decide to invade. I have 1942 there. I actually think the raid was in 1943. I need to, I'll look this up again. I probably have a typo there. One way or the other, I'm right and wrong. I'm either wrong in the way I'm talking about things, or I'm wrong in what I wrote. So, and right the other way, I guess you could say. But anyways, the Allies decide to do a naval invasion, or an amphibious assault. And if you don't know what amphibious assault is, it's the idea of attacking from the sea. They do an amphibious assault against a town in France called Dieppe. It's in northern France, along the English coast, pretty close for England to get to. Again, can be shown that on the map coming up a little bit. But basically what I can say here is this is just, well, as it says also there, a complete failure. In every way you can ask for failure, this raid fails. This was done something that was like, hey, we think we can do this. Hey, what if we get a foothold? Hey, what if this works out better than we can imagine? Because they actually do this with the intention of, okay, let's do this. Let's learn our lessons. If we can get a foothold, great. But if it doesn't go well, we can pull out. And then, well, that's what happens. It doesn't go well. It really doesn't go well. I put it there, and I'm not going to explain too much further, but everything that can go wrong does go wrong. They missed, going over a few things. They misjudged the tides. When they attacked, the tide wasn't just right. They had a lot of their vehicles get swamped. The Germans had very good defenses up. Their air force was devastating. They had their navy, which in this case, we're not talking about like their big, huge battleships and things like that. We're actually talking about little boats, little PT boats. Basically just ran around our landing craft and ran around our, I shouldn't say our, the British, well, ours, the Allied destroyers and just ships that we had in there, and we're just pot-shotting them. These little PT boats, little speedboats, they had machine guns on them, they had torpedo tubes on them, and they caused a lot of damage. And yes, the British had PT boats too, and actually part of World War II that I should probably do a big lesson on is the war along the coastlines of Fortress Europe and Great Britain with these little speedboats. It's kind of fascinating, actually. I can't go into it as much, but that was a major problem at Dieppe. these little speedboats. They were like killer bees going around, just being annoying and doing some damage. But the Air Force was a major thing. But one of the worst things to happen for the Allies, though, wasn't necessarily, well, it was the idea that the Germans were entrenched. They had great defensive fortifications. Their Air Force was in place to really cause damage. Their PT boats were in place to really cause damage. Now, the worst thing for the Allies in this is the Germans knew everything. They knew the plans before it came. The Germans knew the day it was going to be. They were ready for it. They knew the landing spots. They knew what the British were going to be trying to do in this landing. And by the way, it's mostly a British operation, and Canadian troops are the ones mostly used in this. And they just get pounded. If I remember right, I had the notes somewhere. Sorry. Numbers might be a little bit off, but I believe it's something like between 10 to 12,000 Allied troops, mostly Canadian, storm these beaches. Less than 2,000 come back. Right there, yes, about 14 to 1,500 die, but the rest are captured. This is just a devastating defeat for the Allies, and just tons of equipment is just left on the beach. Equipment is expensive. When you use that much, and it just kind of went to waste, that kind of teaches you something. So this is one of those things. Dieppe is one of those things that's considered like the blessing in disguise type thing. Because when you have everything that can go wrong, and yeah, it was bad for the people involved, definitely, then you realize all the things that need to get fixed and what you probably need to do in the future when you actually have the main invasion, which becomes the Normandy invasion year and a half later after this. So, but that's Dieppe, and that's how Dieppe plays into this overall thing. Is it's essentially the practice run that goes horribly wrong, but it's the blessing in disguise where the Allies learn, okay, we need to take care of this stuff. And I have the three major lessons down at the bottom. I've talked about these. It's like, all right, we need to make sure we have complete naval supremacy, even against those dang little speedboats. We have to have complete air supremacy. We need to have so many planes in the air that we just swat away the Luftwaffe like flies. And we need to make sure they have no clue what's coming at them, or to control the narrative or control what they know. So we really have control. The Allies are the ones with control of what's going on. So, and I'm going to be addressing all three of those things essentially as we go on. So, with that in place, the Allies start preparing. Now, they've been preparing for this since 1942, but a lesson that we haven't had yet is on the battlefield of the Atlantic, and I'm sorry, at this point, at least this year, we're not going to be able to get into it as well. But by the end of 1943, the Allies have pretty much got the Battle of the Atlantic on their side, meaning that they've been able to put off the German submarines from, I was about to say being a nuisance. Let's put it this way. Winston Churchill was afraid of one. Winston Churchill felt like if he was going to lose the war, it was going to be because of the German submarines. They were that devastating to the supply networks coming into Great Britain and getting supplies from places like the United States or from their colonies around the world. It was that bad. But because they actually broke what was called the Enigma Code, basically the coded messages between submarines and the command bases, were able to find out, or the Allies were able to find out where those submarines were and be able to deal with them a lot easier and hunt a lot of them out. They still caused some damage, but not so much to where we felt more safe now getting just massive amounts of men and material, weapons of war over to Britain and preparing for the invasion. And the pictures I have up here pretty much are showing this. Just like, look at the ship in the bottom right if you can't tell what's going on there. I mean, that is just packed full of men. It is one of those things, they just packed it full, just to get as many guys on there as possible. Get them over there. Other pictures, you're seeing the fuel depot, seeing all those ships in harbor that needed to get unloaded with just massive amounts of materials. Just countless planes, tanks, anti-tank weaponry, artillery, just like they're loading it up. And I do put up here that it was jokingly said that the island of Great Britain might sink because there's just so much stuff on it. Anyways, that's the preparation the Allies are making. They're just building up tons of stuff, and at the same time, they're planning and trying to do all that stuff based off the lessons of Dieppe to make this a successful thing. Like, having all this stuff is one thing, having it work and be successful, like actually getting on those beaches at Normandy or invading France somewhere, well, that's a whole different matter, because the Germans, they're not sitting on their haunches. They're setting up something that is called Fortress Europe, and part of the Fortress Europe is what is called the Atlantic Wall. Basically a series of fortifications going from Norway all the way down to France that are meant to repel any type of Allied amphibious assault, essentially, any major Allied amphibious assault. Basically stop them on the beaches. So, these are a lot of pictures of those preparations. They have shore batteries. When I say shore battery, basically gigantic cannons that have such a range that they can hit any Allied battleship or anything like that that they know of, and have the same type of range or distance. I mean, they can just be popping our ships out of the water, especially if they know we're coming. They have machine guns and very heavily fortified pillboxes, meaning that they can survive bombings, a lot of bombings, and just incredibly protective structures all across these beaches and these potential landing points from Normandy down to France. And this is all built up over the course of years, basically from back in 1941 on. You could say it started in 1940, but I think it really in earnest 1941, 1942. These are just getting built. Now, there are two generals that were put in charge of these fortifications and basically making sure that an Allied invasion doesn't work. One we've talked about a bit so far, and that is Erwin Rommel. In fact, you see a picture of him up there in the upper left. He is out basically inspecting the fortifications that have been built. His idea to repel an Allied invasion is stop them on the beaches. Make sure they just can't get anywhere. And so he was in charge of just getting all those fortifications and traps and things like that on those beaches, and setting up kill zones and stuff like that to make sure they just stop the Allies on the beaches when they come. Now, the other general that was actually in charge, kind of in tandem with Rommel, is a guy named Rundstedt, also another one of the more famous generals of World War II for the German side, seen as one of the better military geniuses in the German army. But he had a completely different idea than Rommel. Just to go back to this map here, his idea was, all right, we need to keep a lot of panzer divisions in reserve, a couple miles back, or maybe even, more than a couple miles back, like 15 miles back, or in good, well-stationed places to hit the Allies when they're on the beaches. So kind of hold a lot of our men and material back, and when the Allies land, let them land with enough stuff where they think they're all right, and then pounce on them and destroy them on the beaches. And the whole idea there is like, it's one thing to plug the beaches like Rommel wanted to destroy them, but at the same time that means that the Allies probably wouldn't be able to land very much, and they just retreat, and then they'd be able to try again later because they'd still have some men and materials left. Rundstedt's idea was like, no, let them get enough of that stuff on there and then destroy them. Kill them all, destroy those machines, and it'll take them a lot more time to retrain men and to build those materials, and then we can continue to refortify. So when they both basically said this is our plans to repel the Allied invasion, Hitler liked both of them. He says, all right, Rommel, you're in charge of doing that. Try to get them on the beaches. But if they break through, Rundstedt, you are in charge of, here's some panzer divisions, here's some, basically some armies. You're in charge of these armies, and you will do what you want to do. And if they do land and are building up, then do what you got to do. Pounce on them. He liked both ideas, so it's kind of a double whammy thing. And yeah, it was a fairly sound strategy, and it was something that the Allies were very worried about. They knew that these were the two strategies being used by the Germans. So you have to deal with both of those. How do you do that? Now. So in comes the idea of trying to be diversionary, essentially. And let's go back up to this map. Okay, let's just right off the bat, we're just going to say that anything that was a possible landing point here in Denmark or Norway was just taken off the books, because it would just take too long for the British Navy and the American Navy to get there, and the Germans would just, they'd see it coming. They'd be able to get preparations in place. They do have their Navy still in place. That could cause a lot of ruckus for us. Their Air Force would be a little bit more prepared all the way up there. The fjords of Norway, not ideal settings for major invasions. And of course, if you invade Norway, how does that help you get into Europe? How does that really open up a front against Germany? So Norway was pretty much out. Denmark, which, hey, that'd be a great place to come straight down to the heart of Germany, but it was just too risky of a place. So really, you got to look at this coastline right here. Okay, basically Belgium down to France. This was considered just too far away, and you had the submarine bases over there as well. Again, you know, those would raise heck, and you would not have total naval supremacy down there. So the Allies really were just looking at this place. Hey, it's right across the English Channel. We could get there within a day easy, half a day thing. Like, you know, in a way you could launch this, and the Germans might see it coming, but they wouldn't be, I mean, if they're not prepared, they're not prepared, basically. You know, they'll be prepared with whatever they have, essentially. So with that in mind, and both sides knew that. The Allies kind of knew that whole area would be the target area. The Germans knew that whole area would be the target area. And the Allies actually let the Germans know that would be the target area. It's like, okay, we know that we can't keep them from, we're not going to fake them out with saying, okay, we're going to go to southern France, or we're not going to fake them out with the idea of like we're going to Normandy, or sorry, not Normandy, to Norway. I hope I said Norway in the last little bit. Basically, the Allied spy network was supposed to let the Germans kind of know this and kind of feed them little tidbits, but not enough to where, of course, the Germans knew any concrete knowledge, but to where like, okay, what's going on? Just kind of get them anxious, get them a little bit paranoid, get the Germans paranoid. So, and it does come down to two different places, and basically, like, no one knew which of these places was really going to be the attack point. Like, when I say no one, on the Allied side, no one knew except for very few people, like General Eisenhower, General Bradley, Winston Churchill, and whatnot, just like your really top brass and high leaders, but nobody else knew. And of course, the Germans really didn't know. But the two places, and this map shows it pretty well, are Calais and Normandy. We're seeing as the two places that, or I shouldn't say Calais and Normandy, it was Calais and Cherbourg, which was over here. These are two major port towns. If the Allies could capture them, they have places to dock ships and unload massive amounts of material. By the way, Normandy was kind of seen in there as potential landing zones, but even the Germans kind of discounted Normandy. The beach is right here. Main reason why? No ports. You know, yeah, it's one thing to land guys on the beach, but you get really clogged up like that, and in some ways the Germans are like, yeah, let them land on the beaches. I mean, we got our kill zones there. We'll easily be able to get our panzer divisions in there. Like Runestedt's, both Rommel and Runestedt's ideas would work really well right there in Normandy. So the Germans were thinking they need those towns. They need Calais and Cherbourg. For that purpose, both Calais and Cherbourg actually had demolition teams in there, and with the idea of like, well, if we do lose them, blow them up. You know, blow up those piers, and don't blow up the whole town, but blow up any, why they're useful, get rid of the ports, essentially. So again, Cherbourg and Calais. Although it did become known over time that Normandy could very well potentially be well, to the Germans, I say they realized that Normandy could be a likely spot because it is a lot of beach space to land on. Whereas a lot of the other spaces up here, you have a lot of cliffs or areas that are just too boggy, essentially. You wouldn't get very far. So it basically came down to those two things. And so the Allied strategy at this point is make the Germans think that we're going to go here. We know the real plan is here. When I say allies, I'm talking about the top guys, like the Supreme Allied Commander Eisenhower and his few trusted generals and advisors like General Bradley. Well, we're going here, but let's try to fake him out that we're coming here. And to that end, one of the big things they did, and I talk about this at the bottom here, is they built a massive fake army here in Dover. Cali looks like it's the easiest one to take. Look how close it is. You just hop, skip, and a jump kind of get over there. And the Germans were very worried about that. But a huge fake army is built there. If you haven't really noticed this picture down here, that's an inflatable tank. They had tens of thousands of these inflatable tanks, essentially plywood airplanes. They don't work. But from German spy planes would fly over, they'd see this stuff and see all this massive buildup. And then the Allies made sure to let the Germans know that Patton was in there and that he was in command of this fake army. Oh, that rankled Patton a lot. Patton really wanted, he's been out of like I talked about earlier, he got fired essentially from being a general. He's still in the army, but just doesn't have a command at the moment. And he really wants a command. And to be told he's in charge of the fake army, that rankled him. But it actually worked really well because the Germans were always worried, when are they going to put Patton in? Where are they going to put Patton in? Of course, the Allies will have Patton do this invasion because he's the best general they got. So Eisenhower used Patton as basically bait, as kind of this in charge of this fake army to fake out the Germans. And so they really did focus on that area. Now, the Allies made sure that no one could get in and out of that area. All the civilians were given like military uniforms, even kids. So then they just walk around and made it look like it was just all military there when it was actually just the civilians that lived there, but they were not allowed to leave. Kind of like COVID-19 quarantining. Anyways, at least they could be around each other. No social distancing. You just couldn't get out of Dover. So that's what kind of goes in. It's just like, I could go into a lot more stories here, but that's the efforts that the Allies take to try to just fake the Germans out. They know they're going towards Normandy, but the Germans are like, okay, is it Calais or Normandy or Cherbourg area? So anyways, moving on here. When the invasion actually does come, it was scheduled, if I remember correctly, for June. I could be wrong with this one. I think it was June 3rd or June 2nd, 1944. And it got pushed back because of bad weather. And when you got to June 5th and June 6th, 1944, it seemed like we were going to keep the bad weather was going to keep on. And it seemed like this whole thing was just going to, if it kept like this, they were just going to have to cancel the whole thing because they did not want to wait too late into the summer. They might even have to wait a whole another year before they could do this. But then it's like, the way it's talked about is like kind of, the weather didn't seem like it was going away. From what they knew at the time, it was like, this is going to be around. And then all of a sudden, they had their clear enough weather to go. So the night of June 5th, they send over the paratroopers. Now, notice I talked about this whole thing being amphibious assault, but there are the use of paratroopers too. Like they just, any idea they have, they're going to use. And the entire purpose of the paratroopers, and I do need to talk about these guys a little bit because they're a major part of this whole thing. The paratroopers, which comprised of British commandos in this area right here, and then the 101st and 82nd Airbornes over here, mostly by Utah Beach. Their entire purpose was basically to discombobulate the Germans and, if possible, capture key points to make the amphibious assault easier. The main amphibious assault easier, I should say. So they're, excuse me. So they go in the night of June 5th. They're heading down. And it was expected, like I put this picture in here on purpose because that night of June 5th, when Dwight D. Eisenhower was going to bed, and this is from his wife's journal, he told his wife that how do I put this? He knew that those paratroopers, they had an 80% expectancy to die. That they were going to lose 80% of their paratroopers. But it was seen as like one of those necessary things to do because their duty was so needed for the overall operation to work. And so, what he basically told his wife was, "This is the hardest thing I ever had to do, was to shake these men's hands and say good luck." Um, uh, I'm assuming that the paratroopers didn't really know what their death expectancy was, but yeah, it was near 80% what they thought they might be losing. The thing is that the one, because of the weather, like cloudy and stuff like that, and then just the Germans, of course, planes aren't quiet. They see them coming. the uh, the Germans, they have a lot of anti-aircraft guns in the area, and they're shooting up those planes pretty good. Hard to see them in the night sky, but basically discombobulates the Americans and British coming down, and especially for the Americans, for the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. They get dropped all over the place and definitely don't hit the places they were supposed to. Again, this is one of those things where it's seen as like a blessing in disguise, because it was so chaotic. I think it was something like, again, I need to look up my numbers again. It's something like we lose about 30 to 40%, or maybe 20 to 30% of the paratroopers that night, somewhere around there. Basically, still a lot of guys. I mean, we lose a lot of paratroopers the night of June 5th into the morning of June 6th. But the death count was not near as high as what Allied Command was expecting, and they do a dang good job. If anybody's ever seen Band of Brothers, it specifically talks about one group of paratroopers go in and their experiences, especially on D-Day. It's quite good. I can't say anyways, it's quite good. They do a good job. But that's the whole story of the paratroopers there. I could give more, but again, the lesson's going a little bit longer, and I realize I just got to stop some of the tangents coming to my mind. So the last thing we're going to talk about for this part of the lesson, this will be a two-part thing, is the amphibious assault. The beaches are divided into 5 different beachheads, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Now, if you're looking at that and seeing the flags, those are appropriate. Utah and Omaha beaches are basically American beaches where American troops will be landed. Gold and Sword beaches are where mostly have British infantry landing. And then Juno is pretty much Canadians. Yes, the Canadians had a beach at D-Day. I know most Americans do not realize that. One thing I think I've said before, I'll say it again. The Germans are actually quite afraid of Australians and Canadians. They were viewed as the British shock troops. They're kind of like the crazies. They just didn't know what to expect. Just to put that little thing in there, as much as people like to make jokes about Canada today, they were a force to be reckoned with in World War II and World War I as well, definitely. So, moving on though. Paratroopers have done their job as best they can. Amphibious assault comes in the morning of June 6th. So this is what D-Day is. June 6, 1944 is D-Day. I should have put that date on there. I apologize I didn't. So, and again, just because of the length of the lesson, if you guys want to know more about this, please look this up. Like, there's some amazing stories about this on both sides. You can get some pretty crazy stories of first-hand accounts of German soldiers that were there and just what happened and crazy stuff that went down. But taking a general view of this, more or less on all the beaches except for Omaha, the Allies actually have a pretty easy time. I shouldn't say easy, that's not the right word. And they're successful. Like, there's a lot of push up front where it gets pretty hard. A lot of death in a little short amount of time, but they're able to take it, and they're able to take it in a dominant fashion, I could just say. The one that was the easiest was Utah Beach. Like, getting off on Utah Beach, a lot of soldiers were talking about, I was like, man, we expected all this return fire, just where were they? One of the main reasons why Utah was one of the easier beaches is because those paratroopers did their job. But the beach that was by far the hardest one, the one that was in doubt, essentially, that it might not have worked, was Omaha Beach. And by the way, for this whole invasion, you needed all 5 beaches. Like, to not get just one of the beaches was going to be devastating to the Allies. Maybe they still could have made it work, and I imagine they planned for it. but the one that was in doubt was Omaha, and a lot of American soldiers get killed there. And again, I want to go on tangents, a lot of stories of kind of like the tales of heroism and again, also horrible stories of what happens to a lot of Americans on the beach, but I'll let you look that up on your own if you'd like to. Heck, if you haven't done your next research paper yet, there you go. You can do your research paper on basically what happens at Omaha Beach. But there's a reason why pretty much every single World War II video game has a section on Omaha Beach. You know, when they do Normandy, they usually choose Omaha Beach as the one to re-experience, essentially. So, anyways, but overall, they're able to get on these beaches and get a foothold, essentially. So, I'm going to leave it at this point, just with the idea that, hey, the Allies were able to make everything work. The Germans saw them coming, but I will talk next in the next part of this lesson what the Germans were doing this whole time, you know, and some reasons why this was so successful because the Germans got faked out. I'll see you in the next lesson, or the next part of this lesson.